Imagine living in a world where your very existence is threatened daily, where your neighbors turn against you, and where propaganda blinds an entire nation. This was the reality under the Nazi regime. Greetings everyone. Today, we're going to explore the harrowing experiences of those who lived under Nazi oppression during World War II. From the ghettos to the concentration camps, from the streets of Vienna to the villages of Belarus, we'll uncover the brutal reality of life under the Nazi regime. We'll also shed light on the resistance movements that rose against this tyranny, revealing the courage and resilience of those who fought back. If you find this video interesting, please support us by hitting the like button. Now, let's get started. In 1941, in the city of Lviv, in what is now Ukraine, but was then Poland, more than 4,000 Jews lost their lives in a mere 7 days. Innocent Jewish people were dragged from their homes, arrested, and killed. And it was not only the Germans who committed these acts. There were many anti-Semites in Poland as well. And these tragic acts were repeated among the same Polish citizens. Thus, people under the Nazi regime were forced to live in daily fear of violence. At this time, the Nazis justified their persecution of the Jews by claiming that the Jewish people were involved in communism and assassination plots, and then spread these ideas among the people of the country. They ruled, so much so that the Nazi rule at this time could now be called brainwashing. Germany annexed Austria in March 1938. Many Austrians gathered in the streets when they came under German rule, and applauded the Germans as they took over their country. In fact, there are still images of Austrians greeting Hitler's motorcade with smiles and salutes. Thus, at the time, the Germans were considered a welcome presence by many Austrians. For the Jewish people in Austria, however, this was the beginning of a tragedy. Immediately after Germany annexed Austria, Vienna began to experience acts of violence by anti-Semitic citizens. Soldiers and citizens banded together to attack Jewish stores and set them on fire. As in the earlier incident in Poland, it was not only the Germans who engaged in violence, but also the Austrian citizens who were the perpetrators. Police were deployed to the scene of the German and Austrian attacks on Jewish stores. However, it was not to stop the violence by the citizens, but to arrest the Jews who were the victims. The fire brigade was also on the scene, but only in case a fire broke out in a Jewish store and spread to the stores of non-Jews. Until the Germans arrived, these people lived together in the same town in Austria. These acts of vandalism, which were most intense around November 1938, resulted in the destruction of more than 7,500 Jewish stores and attacks on schools, cemeteries, and homes in a matter of days. Some 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and about 100 Jews were murdered. And these days are known today as Kristallnacht. It represents the manner in which the stores were destroyed and broken glass scattered all over the city. It is a sad and painful history that does not fit such a beautiful name as Kristallnacht. What is tragic is that it was not only the Germans who committed the atrocities, but also the people of the country under their rule. They were heavily influenced by Nazi propaganda, and this led to many tragedies. But what the Nazis were using at this time to instill their own political ideas into the people was an act of propaganda. For example, Paris, France was in a bit of a special position, because the Nazis wanted to use Paris to demonstrate the prosperity of the society they were creating. What I mean is that at this time, Paris was considered the center of culture and society. So the Nazis wanted to create a glamorous atmosphere for their country by promoting various art forms, even during wartime, without severely suppressing Paris. However, this freedom was only superficial and manipulated by the Nazis. Media such as radio and newspapers, which provided citizens with correct information, were extremely controlled. For instance, a newspaper named Paris Soir was published in German during this period, despite being a Parisian publication. This Parisian newspaper was published in German, highlighting the extent of Nazi influence. The only French-language content was a small number of interleaved leaflets inserted in the newspaper. Therefore, the French public had no way of knowing what was really happening in the world. There was no way to get the correct information to live in wartime. In response to Allied actions, Germany imposed harsh sanctions, such as cutting off food imports to countries that resisted Nazi rule. For instance, the Nazis cut off the Dutch food supply when Dutch railroad workers went on strike to aid the Allies. By May 1945, this led to over 20,000 starvation deaths in the Netherlands. Also, in describing the state of starvation in Poland, historian Ivan Nuzmika writes, during World War II, the Polish people faced two simple choices: starve or die. They were to starve to death, or find a way to survive. The food rations for the Polish were critically low, leading to inevitable starvation. The grim choice was stark: suffer from hunger or resort to desperate measures for survival. And the second option, find a way to survive, meant taking measures such as theft and illegal production and trade. In other words, the only way for the Polish people to survive was to choose the second option. Thus, a black market for the illegal distribution of food eventually began to form in Poland. But of course, it was dangerous to distribute or purchase food in violation of German regulations, and those arrested were either executed on the spot or sent to forced labor. Now let's look at the lives of those compelled into labor. During World War II, about 3 million Polish citizens were compelled into labor as part of the Nazi war effort. Some workers worked at home, but hundreds of thousands were taken to Germany. They were forced to wear clothes with the letter P to indicate that they were workers from Poland. And they lived under harsh conditions and strict rules, surrounded by barbed wire near factories. And many of the factories in which they worked manufactured German weapons. Unfortunately, the factories that made these weapons were prime targets for Allied forces attacking Germany. As a result, many of them had nowhere to run, and were caught in air raids that claimed their lives. Forced labor occurred in both factories and on farms. Working on farms might have been marginally safer, as they were less likely targets for attacks. But whatever the work was, it was still forced labor by the Nazis. And there was no escape from abuse and inhumane treatment. Thus, the people of the countries ruled by the Nazis were deprived of information, food, and even life through forced labor, of which the Jewish people suffered the harshest fate. The Nazi regime not only discriminated against the Jewish people on the basis of religion and culture, but also claimed that they were inferior as a race. They considered Jews to be a threat to the purity of the German nation, and sought to exclude them from society. Under these circumstances, the Nazis built settlements, called ghettos, in the occupied territories. Ghettos were areas where the Nazis forced Jews to settle, in order to isolate and control them. The ghetto was a small residential area with narrow streets and poor sanitary conditions. The living conditions were extremely harsh due to starvation and the spread of infectious diseases. Not only that, but those who were relocated to the ghetto were rarely allowed to bring with them the things they had in their original homes. So many Jews lost important mementos of their family history and culture. It was also the first step in the Nazi plan to dominate the Jewish people and erase their entire culture. Jews were also given identification symbols to distinguish them from other citizens, and were not allowed to associate with other people, even outside the ghetto. In this way, the Nazis pushed for the complete elimination of Jews. Ghettos were set up all over Europe, and most of the Jews who survived World War II experienced a harsh life in ghettos. And where Jews who left the ghetto were taken was often to concentration camps, where genocide took place. In other words, the ghetto may have been more like a prison before being sent to an execution site than a home or residence. And while it is well known that genocide took place in Nazi concentration camps, the genocide did not take place only in the camps. As the German army marched toward Russia, massacres such as burning entire cities to the ground were committed on numerous occasions. In a village in the far reaches of Belarus, almost the entire population was herded into a single barn, set on fire, and killed. Of the approximately 150 or so villagers, only 6 survived, 1 adult and 5 children. And it was not only the Germans who massacred the villagers at this time, but also various collaborators working for the Nazis in the area. Throughout the Nazi occupation of Belarus, more than 600 villages were burned and some 2.23 million people died. The Nazi regime's policies and propaganda exacerbated divisions and hostility within communities, tragically pitting neighbors against each other based on religious and ethnic lines. Many people must have lived in fear and trembling at the time. However, there were also strong resistance movements in many Nazi-occupied countries, such as France, Denmark, Poland, Greece, Belgium, and Norway. These groups, commonly referred to as underground organizations, were determined to save Jewish lives. For example, some organizations in France provided critical information to the Allies during the planning stages of the Battle of Normandy landings. That led to the liberation of Europe. It was dangerous work, and within 3 months or so, many of those who participated lost their lives, yet these activities contributed to saving the lives of thousands of Jews. And in addition to military activities, some groups resisted the Nazis through methods such as sabotage in their factories and distribution channels for goods. Denmark also had collaborators within its government, which succeeded in getting the Jewish people to escape to Sweden before the Nazi massacre took place. By doing this, Denmark is said to have saved almost all the Jews in the country, to the surprise of many. In Denmark, 492 Jews were placed in concentration camps. Of these, only 150 died. Although there were casualties, they were far fewer than in other European countries. The atrocities committed by the Nazis serve as a grave reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the importance of vigilance against such ideologies. It is a great relief that there were people who had the courage to stand up to them. We must face the past history with sincerity and learn from it so that we will never repeat the same mistakes again. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more insightful content. Take care and see you in the next video. Goodbye.